Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. My name is Russell Brooks, tonight's host of Inside Scoop. Tonight's program focuses on education. February is Black History Month, a time in which we honor the accomplishments of the African American community. For many, celebrating Black history is a source of pride. For some, such celebrations are viewed as controversial, divisive in fact. Tonight, Sean Miller, assistant principal at George C. Marshall High School, joins me to discuss the importance of teaching Black history. Sean, welcome to Inside Scoop.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to begin by giving you a chance to tell the audience a bit about yourself and what motivated you to become a teacher.
Yeah, very interesting question. I've been in education for 11 years. Currently, as you mentioned, an assistant principal at George C. Marshall within Fairfax County Public School System. Previously was an African American history teacher as well as AP African American Studies. I have a very unorthodox path to becoming a teacher. I started my career out as a marketer and a graphic designer. So for 8 years, I was in corporate America. I was thinking about the American dream. I wanted a corner office, ended up with a corner office, and was actually in line to be a vice president of a financial institution. And during my years in corporate America, I would go out to DC public schools with the job of establishing student-run credit union branches. And I would go out to the schools and, being a teacher was the last thing on my mind. I had been recruited to be a teacher fresh out of college. I was like, oh no, never. That's on the bottom of the depth chart in terms of my career aspirations. But after a while of going out to the public schools, I had a peer. She was the director of business development. And she came up to me one day and she said, Sean, you're gonna be a teacher one day. And I was like, there's no way on this green earth I'm gonna be a teacher. Then about after a year going into public schools, I felt the call. I felt the bug, and I felt like, wow, I could really do this. I can positively impact young people's lives. And on a whim, I remember it was a June 18th. I walked away from corporate America on that day, knowing nothing about being a teacher, and I ended up leaving, becoming a substitute teacher. Then that year, Mount Vernon High School asked me did I want to join their staff as a special education instructional assistant. And I said, of course, because they knew I wanted to be a teacher. And then during that year, for the following year, they said, Sean, hey, you want to be a teacher? I said, you bet it. So I ended up being a teacher, and here I am today.
Excellent. Now, you become a teacher because you want to interact with students.
Yes.
You want to guide them, to mold them. You're a principal now.
Yeah.
Do you miss that interaction with young people?
100%. So being an administrator kind of pulls the veil back in education in terms of policy making, discipline, instructional leadership. But me, along with a lot of educational leaders, I believe we always yearn that almost like a sacred space of a classroom. A classroom is an environment where we can shape impressionable young people's minds, and maybe 30 students and maybe 25 students. So there's something about being in front of the young people and interacting with the young people. And what I say is that all classes have a certain collective personality. And being able to address the specific needs of that collective personality and the individual students, and then after 90 minutes, having a whole different set of collective personalities, and then figuring out how can you help them achieve academic success, there's something powerful about that. So I will say I do miss it. Not necessarily all day, every day, but as every educator has a heart for that, no matter what role they take.
Excellent. Now, I became familiar with you and your work because you were involved with the Advanced Placement African American Studies course. And as you recall, that course became somewhat controversial in the midst of this national debate about the efficacy, importance of that course. Certain politicians in various parts of the country denigrated the course. What did you think during that entire controversy?
I thought it was very interesting. It's still an ongoing debate about the value of a course like AP African American Studies. But my perspective when we first launched the course at the time at South County High School, it was just a great educational opportunity. I think it's a course that supplements other history classes. It also supplements other courses that they take because it's an interdisciplinary course. So students are talking about the arts, they're talking about technology, they're talking about history, they're talking about psychology, they're talking about so many different aspects of education. So for me, even in the midst of the controversy, I wanted to keep the main thing, which is the students. I think that the curriculum added a value not just for African students or African American students, but students of a diverse population, because the things that we were able to cover in that class, they're able to leverage that in their other classes. They're able to say, okay, I have a fresh new context. What I'm learning in world history, U.S. history, and government. And I think as an educator, it's very important for us to give students access to as much information as possible to help them shape their own worldview. So it's not indoctrination, it's giving them information and allowing them to use that as evidence for how they look at the world.
Now, I alluded to the fact that your class was widely covered in the local media.
Yeah.
What was special about your teaching method?
I think my teaching method is very much rooted in authenticity. Every class that I taught, no matter what the content area, I feel like was always an extension of who I am as a person. So when it comes to AP African American Studies, it was leveraging the curriculum, and then it's taking anecdotes from my own personal life, being true and authentic. And I'm a big believer, particularly for high school students, they can sniff out who's real and who's not real. So I've always prided myself on giving them everything that I had, with the hope that through my transparency and my ability to make connections between the curriculum and real life, that will open them up to want to share and then also look at the world from a different perspective as well. And then also, I've been a lifelong artist. So the creative arts and performance arts and visual arts have always been a part of what I've integrated into the curriculum. So my love for hip hop translated into students analyzing hip hop lyrics as historical documents, whether they may be primary or secondary documentation. We utilize that. Developing art, and students were at some point using 3D printers to create coins to represent ancient African cultures. So the artistry presented students with something that many history classes were not able to give them. So, and it became also a safe space. So my approach was, feel free to come in as your holistic self. Let's have these conversations. I'm notorious for having a lesson plan and a student walking in the door and asking a very probing question and saying, hey, Mr. Miller, what do you think? I said, okay, let's stop the plan for the day. And then because of that democracy and the kids coming in, and they're looking at something in current events and having a safe space to have that conversation where it doesn't devolve into an argument, and they feel heard, they feel seen, they feel valued, and then able to weave them back into or direct them back into where I wanted them to be in the first place with the lesson plan. But they just saw the organic nature of the class, and my ability to kind of tap into what their needs were, I think helped them out a lot. And it helped me out a lot as well.
So it sounds like the students reacted positively to your approach.
Yes.
And how diverse were your classes?
Pretty diverse. So one of the things that we talk about in the course a lot is that no specific culture is a monolith. So there's diversity in every single culture, and that's something that I harped on in the class. Now, typically what we will find, there will be a majority of African American students, African students, but we also had students all over the African diaspora. So their perspective on the diaspora itself and culture was very different. We also had Latinx students. We also had Caucasian students. We also had so many different types of students that were in our classes. which I found a lot of value in because it became something that's just not, okay, this is the black class. No, this is a class that is historical, that anybody can find value in, and that's what we really pushed at the school, that this is for everybody.
Was there any pushback from your fellow teachers or maybe the school administration?
No, not at all. I was fortunate in that when the pilot program was launched, had great administrative support. This was something that the principal championed. He came to me. He knew that it was something that I was passionate about, that I championed for as well. So we had support, teachers supported, and what we found is, even if there was a lack of support that was unspoken, what we found is because of the richness of the class and the value that students were getting out of it, they had no choice but to talk about it. So their teachers would hear about the class throughout the course of the year, and eventually they would come to me and say, hey, student A, B, and C, they've been talking about what they've been learning in class. Or they would take ideals from the class and then utilize it in their projects for other classes. So they started to see the value in the class because it enriched their entire learning experience.
You received the Virginia Council Social Studies, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Excellence in Teaching Award in 2023. How did that recognition make you feel?
It made me feel awesome. I'm going to be honest, many years ago, particularly early in my educational career, I told myself this, and it kind of seems defeatist in a way. I said I'll never be a teacher of the year. I'll never get any kind of awards because of, I wanted to be authentically me, and I felt like people didn't get it. You know, people would say I was a good teacher. I felt like I was a good teacher, but on a larger scale, I felt like just people didn't understand, you know, where I was coming from. So receiving a recognition like that encouraged me that I was on the right path. It's like, you know, students are the main thing. Be authentic. Use practical research and results-based ways of instructing students. Put it in a gumbo pot. Add some seasoning, add some flavor to it. And then eventually, and I've told students this a lot, when you're authentic, people may not understand you, but eventually the world will catch up and they will understand the authentic people. So I was able to live that out by being true to myself as an educator. And then so when you get awards like that, I was excited. I was excited because things were seeming to come together, and they're still coming together now, so I'm still excited about it.
Excellent. We're off to a great start, Sean, but we're going to have to pause our conversation for a short break. So please, audience, stay with us when we return with more of our show on Inside Scoop.
Nice going, Spencer. I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Hey.
Yeah. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining. No,
Hi.
you cannot
Tell him it was an accident,
count on me.
and we can fix the window.
For sure.
Come on.
Oh, the
I'll come with you.
friends are full.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Fire. 'Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Tilly here's about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi, I'm Russell Brooks, joined by my guest, Sean Miller, Assistant Principal at John C. Marshall High School. Let's continue. Your bio notes that you worked as an equity lead in the school district to conduct social studies curriculum audits and cultural responsiveness and anti-racism. Please describe the duties of an equity lead.
Yeah, it's a lot. So one of the major principles is excellence and equity in Fairfax County Public Schools. So a few years ago, the school district found it to be a priority to establish equity leads within the schools. So there would be an individual that would be responsible for analyzing the school's data in terms of equity, in terms of academic access. They would look at social emotional learning. They would look at cultural responsiveness and reactiveness in terms of making sure that there was a positive school climate for all students. So the equity lead was in a very unique position, and I found myself in a very unique position because I was able to look at things from a perspective of being constructively critical. So I wasn't an administrator. I did, and an equity lead does have a team, so there's individuals that work along in terms of crafting programming. So at the school that I was an equity lead, I had a cohort, and we would talk about issues of equity within the school with a group of teachers and say, okay, what are issues that are pervasive in this school that are opportunities for us to grow to make sure students have success? So a lot of it was data, looking at disciplinary data, academic data, and say, okay, well, these are areas of opportunities that we can grow in. Now, let me propose some programming and work with this whole team to figure out ways to directly address the needs of the students. Then also thinking about affinity groups in terms of when you look at the demographic makeup of a school. Which schools may feel like they're which students may feel like they're minoritized, and how can you offer supports? Another thing that I did was focus groups in terms of did students feel like the school environment presented equitable opportunities for them. So giving students voice and taking all of that information and sharing that with staff members and sharing that with administrators. So every school, because of their unique needs, the equity lead would kind of approach it slightly different. In some schools, they'll do different book clubs. I saw today our equity team led a cultural foods potlucks that allow students to bring some things in and to sample and learn about different cultures. So some schools will do a lot of different things, but ultimately it's about making sure that these diverse students in Fairfax County Public Schools have access and also are being seen, heard, and valued as people.
So obviously they still exist in Fairfax County Schools.
They still do.
Does every school have an equity lead or equity team?
Yes, 100%. And it's exciting to see that it's still there. They're still working. I was talking to equity leads today. So typically at the high school level, they will have 2, middle school level will have 1, and in the elementary schools, they will also operate with 1 as well. So it's very exciting to see that this effort is still continuing because, like I said, it allows a person and a group to be constructively critical for the betterment of the students and the betterment of the school.
What was the genesis for the creation of these positions? Was it the George Floyd killing several years ago, or was it the county's One Fairfax policy?
Yeah, well, I would say One Fairfax. So it predates George Floyd's murder. So the county, and particularly at the time, Dr. Brabrand, in conjunction with the Board of Supervisors and the One Fairfax initiative, like I said, just highlighted equity. It was saying, okay, we are such a diverse school district. And when we look at information and we say, okay, in our diversity, what students are not getting the greatest education possible? Now, how do we address their specific needs while not also setting up a social hierarchy where one group is prioritized over the other, but we're giving students what they need based on the data, the academic trends, and not wanting students to fall through the cracks. So it took more than just central office work, which there's a pretty robust program with central office, but seeing the need to have people in the school, because as I mentioned before, having someone in the building that's able to look at the school data and look at the school climate and look at the school demographics that can tailor programming and initiatives to meet those specific needs is a very powerful thing.
Now, for the audience, one fair factor is a policy of the Board of Supervisors to advance equity and opportunity for all Fairfax County residents. Now, I have to imagine that some people thought creating equity leads was another example of woke educational policies.
Yeah.
What do you say to that criticism?
Well, I think it all comes down to the definition of woke. I could talk ad nauseum what that means. Often it's a misnomer, I believe, and people have to understand what equity means. It goes beyond simply race and ethnicity. It goes to a massive number of students that may be minoritized, may be majoritized, exceptional education, or what some people call special education students, multilingual learners, socioeconomically, and I hate to use the term disadvantaged, but maybe those that finances may not be upper class, as we would say. So there's a litany of students, because every student is uniquely different. And when we talk about equity, no matter what differences a student has, those are always opportunities. So One Fairfax is looking at every single student. What is their best path for achieving success? And their success may be self-defined. Of course, there's Portrait of a Graduate, which Fairfax County Public Schools uses to determine skills they want to develop in students, like being a good communicator or an ethical global citizen. However, every student has an imagination. They have dreams, things they want to accomplish. So how can the public school system assist these students with getting where they want to get and becoming the best version of themselves?
Now, Governor Youngkin here in Virginia has been critical of critical race theory and its influence on primary and secondary education. In fact, in response to his comments, the state conducted a review of the advanced placement course and found that certain changes in the course made it acceptable. How has those comments and the subsequent review affected the teaching of African American history here in Fairfax County?
That's a very good question. I remember during the pilot year, a lot of the revisions were taking place nationally because of pressures politically. For me, my perspective has always been, it's about the students. The reason I've clocked in is for the betterment of students. So as the curriculum was changing, one of the changes that teachers had to deal with was, okay, I've been planning all year for these specific topics and subtopics. Some have been eradicated, but I believe that the curriculum has so much content that's rich, that's prudent for students to learn. And I feel like even though some concepts may have been lost, there was so much out there for them to learn with the pace of College Board that the students themselves wouldn't have noticed. Educators, we would have noticed and said, okay, well, this topic is taken out, this topic is taken out, this topic has been added back in. But ultimately, I think when it came down to how we were teaching it, it was still about the students. We're giving them as much information as possible about African American history and studies. And ultimately, these are things that they're not going to get in other classes. So, even if we lose a concept here and there, there's so many different concepts that they have not been exposed to that there's still value in the coursework.
Sure. Now, a major source of criticism for many on the conservative side of the spectrum has been their concern that aspects of teaching African American history can be divisive. And they claim it's intended to harm white children, to shame them, and make them feel bad about themselves and the contributions of white Americans. How do you respond to that argument?
As a historian, I believe in a concept that I've coined and said a few times: holistic history. It's very difficult, in my opinion, to navigate the story of humanity in a patchwork kind of way, to where we're not filling in the gaps of history and understanding diverse perspectives. So I think a course like African American Studies fills in some gaps and knowledge gaps that many students from any background have not been exposed to. The course is not about demonization or deification of any person, place, or thing. It's about exposing young people and even exposing teachers, because we learn as well in our summer institutes about the depth of the curriculum. And so it's not divisive, it's exploratory, and to me it's inclusive. Because the more that I understand about different demographics of people, and if I look at us all as a human family, and we're all in this together, it behooves me to understand more about the people around me, because we'll have a stronger global citizenry because I can operate off of empathy. The one thing that I taught students in the course is that you will get more out of this course if you look at history through an empathetic lens. In that, imagine, if you will, even if you can't necessarily understand a particular concept or a time frame, but all I want you to do is imagine, no matter what your demographic is, what if it were you? How would you feel? And every demographic, and we talked about this earlier, and I've been talking about this a lot with people, everybody has to deal with struggle. Everybody deals with victories. So the more we understand each other's victories and struggles, the more we start to come to a healthy middle ground to say, wow, you know, our stories weren't exactly alike, but they're close enough for us to understand that we can fight for something better.
And since you had such a diverse student body in your classes, does that give them a different perspective on something like slavery, even if they didn't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about it before they entered the class?
Yeah, it does. So one thing that I always harped on is that slavery is not the beginning of the story and not the end of the story. What we find for a lot of our K-12 students is that's the beginning, middle, and end when it comes to people in the African diaspora. So it's recontextualizing, even though slavery is a big part of the story. One thing that's beautiful about the curriculum is that when we look at Unit 1, we're talking about origins of the African diaspora. So we're talking about kingdoms. We're talking about different ingenuities. We're talking about people of importance. We're talking about nations. We're talking about things that predate the transatlantic slave trade. So we're recontextualizing some things. And once again, let's say victories over victimizations is something that I've harped on over the years.
All right. It's time for another short break, so please stay tuned to this discussion about teaching Black history in Fairfax County schools when we return with more on our show, Inside Scoop.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. I don't know what I'm scared of. But if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes.
Right?
I mean, like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you?
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
We are back on Inside Scoop. I'm the host, Russell Brooks, with tonight's guest, Sean Miller, Assistant Principal at John C. Marshall High School. Let's continue our discussion. As you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack by the Trump administration. We have seen reverberations in the corporate community as well. How is it affecting you and your fellow educators?
I think it's very similar to what I said before. I think educators are engaged in a noble endeavor. You know, when we step in a building, it is based on how we can help students achieve their dreams and goals. So some of the outside things that happen, sometimes it's considered outside noise. We typically operate in a way that abides by policy, abides by the policies and procedures of the school district, but we also want to give them the most rich learning experience possible. So one of the things that is an impact is naturally because our students are so engaged in media, particularly social media, and so they see the news trends that are going on, so it does lead to some probing questions. Our goal and the way that we have responded as teachers is allow them to think critically, put them in constructive, productive ways of having conversations where we're not leading the witness. The goal is to introduce state standards, follow the Fairfax County Schools program of study, and make sure that we're following the path that they're supposed to be on while giving them a little bit of quite a bit of agency to have these conversations about what's going on in current events. So from a day-to-day, some people may say we're walking on eggshells. However, the way that I've looked at it is, particularly for gifted teachers that are passionate, we're always going to find a way to allow students to explore the world that they're living in and then shape their worldview. You know, we're going to give them information, but we're also going to be mindful of the things that are going on, because ultimately, and I've told students this when I taught government, you know, education is a function of government, and there's rules and there's things that I would have to follow as an educator. Them as students also going to have to follow some rules as citizens, and ultimately, you know, we'll find a way through it.
Great. I'm really glad to hear that you're discussing this with your students. I'm a parent just like you.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about the effect that it's having on students, especially your minority students.
Yeah.
Do they find the current situation demoralizing for them?
I would say anecdotally, some do. And that's the beauty of education, because educators, we're not simply lecturers that are sharing content. We have to care about the whole child. You know, and a big thing in Fairfax County Public Schools, and even nationally as I talk to educators around the country, is social emotional learning. So one thing that we've been girded with is practices, techniques to meet students where they are. So sometimes they're going to come in with a heavy weight of what they see, what they read, what they hear. So our goal is to respond to them in a way that they feel like school is a safe space for them. School is a place where they can express themselves. School is a place where they won't be judged. And us as educators, our goal is to support our students through it all. So I think there is a weight that students have, and I've seen it. I've seen ebbs and flows through the years. There's certain times, particularly in political times, where students have different thoughts, which is right for them to have, just like we the adults have thoughts. The young people are formulating their thoughts about how the world works, and politics and education and everything else. So, but school is the perfect place for us to help them make sense of what they're thinking.
Understood. Some critics suggest that in an effort to be more inclusive, some DEI programs went too far and amounted to reverse discrimination.
Yeah.
What's your opinion?
To reverse discrimination, I would say that DEI efforts, once again, we have to look at what that means. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who is under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion? I talked about this earlier. It's so broad-reaching, the students that benefit from efforts to be included. Because I think about it like this. In our workplaces, don't we want to be seen, heard, and valued as adults? What I find is that for students, it's the same very thing. They have that desire to be seen, heard, and valued. So initiatives that specifically address DEI still, particularly definitely in Fairfax County Public Schools, where you'll see in the language it says all students. And when we say all, we mean all. So there's no demographic that should be overly prioritized overall, because it's all the students, because every student has specific needs. So too far, I think that's a relative subjective thing. What does too far mean? And what does it look like if you do eradicate from top to bottom DEI efforts? How many students will be impacted? And we're saying all students. If you eradicate initiatives to support all students, then no one's safe from the reverberations of that.
What do your students think about this argument that DEI or efforts of that nature undermine meritocracy?
Yeah, I think that they, in conversations that I've had with students, in their own thinking, they look at society and believe there is a social hierarchy many times. And these are diverse students. They're looking at the world that they're living in. They're looking at their own schools and saying, okay, are certain segments of students treated differently than others? And in their own mind, they're like, okay, I may not feel the same as other students based on what I'm seeing with my own eyes and my own experiences. So for them, the idea of meritocracy is not always at play for them, for some of the students. So for them, they value initiatives by administrators and teachers to bring them into the fold and have conversations. One thing that we did at Marshall High School just last week, we had the Department of Justice come in to lead a conversation of what's called a Spirit Council. So we had approximately 90 students from various demographic groups come together and talk about what are some of the top issues that they see within the school and propose solutions for those things. So what's going to take place going forward, we're taking all of that information and working every month with these students to figure out how do we address the needs of such a diverse student population. And so this kind of work, and what we found in our post-survey is that you're talking about 85% of the students found value in participating, because they felt like, wow, for the first time, I'm in an organized space and I'm able to share with the entire school, well, at least leadership and other students, how I feel about things in an unfiltered but structured manner. So initiatives like that are things that schools don't always get an opportunity to engage in, but partnering with folks like the Department of Justice to have them come in and us facilitate these rich conversations will allow us to meet the equity goals within our school district.
You're a student of history, or teacher of history. I want to get your opinion on this comparison to an earlier part of American history.
Yeah.
As we both know, following the Civil War, there was a period in which our country tried to make conditions better for African Americans, the descendants of the former slaves.
Yeah.
They tried to give them opportunities which they obviously did not have before.
Yeah.
And that produced a backlash.
Yeah.
And that period post-Reconstruction resulted in oppression,
yes,
violence, that our country didn't completely come out of until the 1960s.
That's right.
Some suggest that we may being a period somewhat similar.
Yeah.
I said somewhat similar today.
Yeah.
As a teacher of history, is that a fair comparison?
I think it's a fair comparison because a person has to ask themselves, did African Americans ever come out of that period? Post-Reconstruction, as you mentioned, you had black codes, you had Jim Crow laws, intentional targeting, you had lynching, you had a removal of the military from the South that would protect African Americans in this new America. But you also saw, particularly from a standpoint of education, you saw a shift in how African Americans were being educated. You had Brown v. Board of Education, great legislation, the integration of our public schools. But you also saw the decimation of black schools. You saw white flight, and you saw the development of suburban neighborhoods, and then the development of the inner city where minoritized individuals were still in these environments. You saw the decimation of black teachers where they could not get hired in certain schools and then had to pursue different careers. So there are some parallels in terms of policy and some of the things that have happened that have negatively impacted African Americans. But what I find throughout history, and it goes back even to the chorus when I talked about African Americans finding victory in spite of it all. And when we think about this coursework, there's value in that human story to think that in spite of the backlash, in spite of the challenges, in spite of the obstacles, that a group of people that are climbing a hill are still uplifting and supporting each other, pursuing business, pursuing education, pursuing careers and the things they want to achieve when the chips were all down. And I think that's what's going to happen always on the other side. It's like a circular thing. And we were talking about this earlier, but what I tell students is that history is always just the same things with a fresh coat of paint. You know, it's a fresh coat of paint. It's like taking a car, and this is what I've shared with students. You take a car, and it's got a bad engine, but if I give it a nice red, shiny paint job, I can still put it out there based on my 2 eyes. That's a wonderful car. However, if I lift the hood, it's going to be something that I may not even be able to drive it off the lot. So history, at times, unfortunately, operates that way. But I believe that there's always hope for victory.
I really am glad to hear there's still hope.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sean. But once again, we must take a short break, and then we will continue tonight's very interesting discussion when we return to our show on Teaching Black History on tonight's Inside Scoop. It's a great show.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy, and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodssafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm Russell Brooks, and I'm discussing the teaching of Black history in Fairfax County Schools with John C. Marshall's Vice Principal, Sean Miller. Let's continue. Sean, you received a master's degree and you're currently pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership and policy studies from Howard University. Please describe the special role of historically Black colleges and universities in the African American experience.
Yeah, that is an awesome proposition. So historically Black colleges and universities, and I've been talking about safe spaces all night. The role of HBCUs was to give African Americans opportunities to pursue a higher education. Like we just talked about post-Reconstruction. In a time where African Americans could not pursue higher education degrees at predominantly white institutions, what you saw was the development of these HBCUs where students that were high caliber, high energy, had a thirst for knowledge, could finally pursue an education at a level to achieve their dreams. And what we saw was you start to see an influx of Black doctors, and you start to see an influx of Black thinkers and intellectuals that were in a space where it went beyond the content, where the education was rooted in African American culture, Black culture, and that's a beautiful thing. So HBCU experience, I've heard the argument over and over with my friends about the difference between historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly white institutions. And that's a circular argument all the time about how one wants to pursue his education. But I found it, so I attended a predominantly white institution for undergrad, and then for my first master's I went to Howard University and back for my doctorate. But what I found was there was such a value to where the concepts, particularly in educational leadership, it was not simply about rhetoric, frameworks. It's about how do you use this information to contribute to the African American community in an insightful way. So it puts students in a very empowered position to understand more deep concepts about their own culture and other cultures. And as I mentioned, the Black experience is not monolithic. There's so much to learn from an HBCU.
And what do you hope to achieve once you attain that doctorate?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, mine is in educational leadership and policy studies. And I think that the most important thing for me is to impact policy, particularly in curriculum and instruction. So when we talk about the AP African American Studies course, we talk about the African American History course and other affinity courses. When you think about a women's history course, or you think about Latinx history, Asian American history, which are courses that have been popping up around the country. In order for those courses to be enacted, you gotta have policy behind it. So I believe that one of my roles is to take my personal and educational experiences to impact curriculum and instruction at a district level so that we can have some of these conversations to say, okay, students are really heard, but you gotta have decision makers in the room. So that's one of my goals, is to really impact a district in terms of the types of courses that they teach and provide for students.
You're also a member of the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. Now tell me a little bit about the history of the fraternity and the importance of fraternities and sororities in the African American experience. I'm sure that probably came up in your advanced placement course.
100%. In the course, it talks about movements and debates, and it talks about Black Greek-lettered organizations. And yes, I'm a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, founded on January 9th, 1914, of course, on the campus of Howard University. Principles of brotherhood, scholarship, and service. And one of the goals of Phi Beta Sigma was to focus on the inclusive we. So when I talk about not being monolithic as African Americans, they wanted to build a bridge for African American men on college campuses to not feel like they had to fit stereotypes, but to say, no, whatever you have to bring to the table that is of value for the community, and we're going to go out and serve the community. So for me, I didn't know anything about fraternities going into college. I only saw one, Omega Psi Phi, on an MTV show, and they were stepping.
Were you a first-generation person to go to college?
Yes, I'm a first-generation college graduate in my family, so that was very exciting for me as well. I took all the lessons from my mom and family, and my mom worked at a university, Norfolk State University, and so I was raised at an HBCU. I was a little kid running around campus all the time, at homecoming games and concerts, little kid, like, what's this kid doing around here? But it was ingrained in me. So in terms of Black Greek letter organizations, when we talk about being inclusive, same thing with HBCUs, where you had African Americans that were not allowed to join white fraternities and sororities. And now you had another safe space that was rooted in community service, that was rooted in philanthropy, that was rooted in culture, and a bond that was meant to better the community at large. So these organizations are still powerful today, working in unison as what we call the Divine Nine, working together to better the community and provide opportunities for many.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that you are also an ordained reverend and associate minister at People's Union Baptist Church in King George, Virginia?
That's correct.
Do you find yourself using some of the lessons of history in explaining current events to members of your church, especially the young people?
100%, and it's very interesting. Just this Sunday, I had a conversation about the history of the Black church, and back to HBCUs. Howard University, when I was in divinity school, had a course called The History of the Black Church, taught by Dr. Renee Harrison, one of my favorite professors ever. So what I've been able to do in the conversation that I had on Sunday is for starting the 26th of this month, we're going to have a 10-week series that I'm going to be leading about the history of the Black church, because one of the things that I've been talking about is when we bring in new believers, we have courses, we talk about doctrine, we talk about theology, but then I've always been like, well, what about the history? Why do we do what we do? How do we understand this from a practical application standpoint? So yes, I have taken those lessons. I believe that my call to ministry is very similar to my call to education. It's about the betterment of other people, and I pride myself on that. So I think history is very important. So we'll talk about civil rights. Where was the Black church doing civil rights? What was it doing? Through all these different eras, and then also leverage that to have a conversation. What is the contemporary Black church doing? Is it still mindful of what it was doing during these times of need, or has it forgotten its way?
That's interesting. So what has been the most difficult question that you've received in those conversations?
Well, one of the most difficult, I'll say the most difficult concepts is, how do you deal with politics? When we think about religion and politics, typically there's a schism. However, if you look at it closely, it's not. You know.
Well, I think for the Black church, and again, you're the scholar, so feel free to correct me. There hasn't been quite that hard divide between our political aspirations in the Black community and the church, because of the fact that the church, as you said, was a safe space where people could be themselves, which they may not have been able to do in the greater community. And the church was a means to organize and mobilize. We know about that from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the South, but I suspect there's also very, very similar situations, though maybe somewhat different, in the North as well. But again, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're 100% correct. And I think the Black church was a central hub of all things community. So when we talk about Black empowerment, and even in the course of AP African American Studies, there's movements and debates, and the Black Power movement is one of those things. Sometimes you had church denominations that were pushing Black Power. You had churches that were against the Black Power movement. But ultimately, the Black church had value, was the center of the community, and we talk about this integration of politics, and back to policy. Policy dictates everything. So if you can educate individuals, not just in the schoolhouse, but in the church house, about how politics can adversely impact you or positively impact you, I think that's a very important thing. Even in the contemporary times, I'm a big believer that a church should educate its parishioners on as many things as possible. You know, same thing with students, like we educate them. We're not always leading the witness and saying doing this, but we're giving you information so you can make sense of your world. Now, of course, you know, we want to be biblical, we want to be grounded, but it's a real world that we live in, and there's real consequences of the world that we live in. So I think the Black church has had political engagement and social engagement, and I'm a big believer that should be the case.
Mm-hmm. You're the author of 2 books. So tell me about those 2 books and your motivation for writing them.
Yeah, I've written 2 books for Scholastic Books, so nationally published books. The first one is entitled My Glasses Give You Superpowers, and the second one is entitled The House of Hip Hop. The first one is based on a story with a young girl, based on one of my daughters. Her vision gets blurry, and she wants to be a superhero, but she feels like having blurry vision is a weakness of hers, so she'll never be a superhero. So she works with her twin sister over the scheme of how to pass her eye exam. But then that scheme falls apart, and then she finally gets glasses and realizes she sees the world from a whole different context. The House of Hip Hop book is based on a young man who wants to be a rapper or MC. He's stuck in upstate New York with his grandparents, and he's bored out of his mind. But he realizes throughout the narrative that his grandparents were there from the very beginning of hip hop, so they walk him through chronologically the story of hip hop, and then he gets inspired by that. So the way that these books came about, back to HBCU, Scholastic made an intentional effort to reach out to HBCUs seeking story pitches for a decodable series called Our Stories, which was designed to address voices that weren't often heard. So you think about from an ethnicity standpoint and allowing students to see characters that look like them and feel like them, that have shared experiences. And I was able to pitch story, and it got accepted. So it got accepted, and they liked what they saw with the first book. They asked me to write a second one. So I've been blessed with the opportunity. And last week I was at Scholastic's Leadership Summit with 140 school districts from 20 states to talk about cultural responsiveness and literacy.
Excellent. Now, we're almost running out of time, but I have to ask this as an educator. Was there a particular teacher that motivated you?
Yes, Miss Holland. Miss Holland was my art teacher in high school. Miss Holland was one that always believed in me, always stood by me. Even when I would get in trouble, she always had my back, and I'll never forget her. I'm still Facebook friends with her, so I love Miss Holland.
Okay. We've run out of time, but let me thank my guest, Sean Miller, for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And for the audience. We always thank you. We hope you join us again for another edition of Inside Scoop.